All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here, and also for the newsletter plug, Dave. My name is Sam Scove. I'm Politico's Space and Emerging Tech reporter. I'm also going to be launching the Space newsletter here in the next couple of weeks. But today I'm honored to be here with General Chance Saltzman, Chief of Space Operations at the U.S. Space Force, to discuss the United States' priorities in space under the Trump administration and how they plan to achieve space superiority. Thank you so much for your time, and welcome, General Saltzman.
Thank you.
So, right off the bat, I think for a lot of people, war in space sounds abstract. The force has talked more and more about warfighting, space superiority, kinetic operations. What does those first early moments of a war in space look like?
Yeah, I think you make a great point. It feels kind of abstract because fortunately we haven't really conducted a large-scale war in space, and that's the way I intend to keep it, by the way. But I think because of its criticality, and we've seen this play out in the modern battlefield, you see it in Ukraine, there is a recognition that denying a country access to their space capabilities does create military advantage. I believe that the way a war starts and extends into space will be mostly as low threshold as possible. So think about it in terms of RF jamming, interference with satellite communications that we know. I think that starts to set the stage for what then could be more and more escalatory. You might try to interfere with dazzling ISR satellites, radar jamming of radar collection satellites. All things that are reversible effects, that's the way we like to talk about them, non-kinetic, reversible kinds of effects. To me, that's how it starts. Unfortunately, that may not be where it ends. If they don't achieve the effects they want with those techniques, then the PRC and Russia both have the capabilities to escalate that up to grabbing satellites, pulling them out of operational orbit. Certainly missile technology and anti-satellite kinetic capabilities, it could also extend there. Then you've got debris that you have to deal with, and so it can escalate to a more traditional kind of destructive form of combat.
And when we talk about those sorts of activities, jamming, lasing, things like that, obviously it's very important for Space Force to practice with within a combatant command and sort of get that training in. What steps are you taking in order to encourage Guardians to get that training and get that interoperability, if you will?
Well, the beauty of the military is I don't have to encourage them. I just tell them what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And so they have to prepare. And one of the things that we've recognized is that day-to-day operations that we've been doing for decades in military space organizations isn't the same kind of operations that prepares us for this kind of high-end conflict that we could see extend into space. And so we've created a new force generation model that allows our operators the time to do the kinds of training to be ready to execute those operations. And what we rely on are simulators and constructive virtual ranges. We can model the space environment pretty well digitally. That gives our operators the opportunity to practice their tactics, practice the procedures that they might be called on to use should we actually get into a contest, a crisis, conflict in space. And so that's what we're really doing, is developing the tactics and practicing them in a simulated environment so that they're ready to go.
And for some combatant commanders raised during the sort of global war on terror, a lot of these newer capabilities may seem very exotic. They may not be used to them. It reminds me a little bit of how we've been arguably slow to adopt drones. Have you sensed eagerness from combatant commanders to incorporate more of space into their operational plans?
It's probably the biggest transition I've seen since the establishment of the Space Force, is the understanding by all of the other combatant commands, all of the other services, how much they rely on space capabilities. And it comes in two basic flavors. One is the traditional ways that we've used space in the past: precision navigation and timing, military satellite communications, the ISR capabilities, missile warning, weather data. They recognize that all of the other services and forces have been sized based on the expectation that they will have access to those space capabilities. It is integrated in a way that can't easily be extracted. You can't just say, well, what are we going to do if we don't have space? We're not designed to operate that way anymore. So that part is critical. The second thing, though, that's happened is that our potential adversaries have built space-enabled targeting attack capabilities. So they can hold targets on the surface, in the air, at risk because of the space-enabled capabilities. So now the other services and combatant commanders recognize that the Space Force has to be able to deny, disrupt, degrade an adversary's space capabilities in order to protect the broader joint force. That narrative is pretty clear. When you listen to the combatant commanders testify, all it takes is one question about space, and you hear them say, yes, this is a critical capability, and we need to invest to develop the concepts, the equipment, the training to make sure that we're ready to go.
And in terms of the back at home, in terms of our industrial base and the personnel that the Space Force can bring, where do we stand? From a manufacturing perspective, are we ready to build those capabilities? And from a personnel standpoint, does Space Force have enough people to accomplish these goals?
I think we are in a period what I describe as managed growth. We've been asked to perform missions that traditional military space organizations have not been asked to do. The most primary of those is gain and maintain space superiority, which is kind of military lingo for protect our capabilities and deny an adversary the use of their capabilities against us. That wasn't really a mission when I started flying satellites. And so with the recognition that there are new mission areas that we have to do, this requires new personnel, new equipment, new training concepts, new ranges, a whole host of other capabilities that we have to bring to bear. And there's recognition of this. I get very little pushback when I acknowledge that, hey, we need to grow in a managed way to make sure we can accomplish these new missions. And no one argues about the need to grow operationally. It's when you start talking about layering on staffs and things like that, that's where the bureaucracy starts to say, well, let's not do that. And I agree with that. We need to grow operationally to accomplish that.
I'm sure there's not a specific number, but is there a range, a percentage that you'd like to grow in terms of personnel in the next couple of years? 10%, 20%, something like that?
No, because I don't have a target number. What I do is I say I have to properly have the number of personnel to do the missions that are required. So as we put new capabilities on orbit, I say, okay, is this 2 squadrons of people? Is it 1 squadron? Do I need 2 op centers? What are the ground stations? What's the network look like? And then I have to put the personnel in place to be able to do that. And then there are the support personnel. You have to grow instructors. You have to grow aggressors that practice enemy tactics against us. So that all is a little bit of growth for each mission area. So rather than just say, I want to be 12,000 people, I say, what's the mission and what's the appropriate manpower that is required to do that mission?
And on that topic, I mean, having alternative sort of ideas of service or paradigms of service like a Space National Guard or that's obviously been something that's been discussed quite a bit. Can you give us any update as to sort of where we stand? It looked like it was going to happen, and then it hasn't quite yet.
Well, it's because it's a multifaceted set of considerations. Congress gave us the authority to have part-time positions inside the Space Force. And while that sounds like, oh, okay, great, this is actually a very novel thing for the Department of Defense. An active component that has both full-time people and part-time people. That's not a space reserve. This is literally part-time positions inside the active component. That's unprecedented anywhere else in the Department of Defense. So we are taking advantage of that. We are actively pursuing where do we want our part-time workforce? What kind of work do they do? How do we best bring what a part-time, citizen guardian, if you will, what do they bring into the mix and how do we best leverage that? Once you have the ability to surge with part-time people, then you say, well, do I need a separate component to also be able to do it? That's what the Guard and Reserve brings, is that surge capacity. And so with this most recent NDAA, the Congress directed us to take the missions that were in the Air National Guard, the space missions, and integrate them into this concept of part-time and full-time. And so we're going through the planning process to consider that. It's actually a very small percentage of the overall National Guard. It's about 578 positions out of more than 100,000 in the Air National Guard. So it's a small contingent, which means it would be hard to establish it as a independent, separate component. It would be so small, it would be hard to recruit and train and equip and think about it because it's just small. It's a small fraction of the force, and so that's why we're working through the planning process to integrate them into the Space Force.
And there's been some, on that topic, there's been some interesting proposals that Space Force should basically do away with the enlisted versus officer rank structure and have a sort of 1 through 10 rank. Theoretically would encourage people to, who had sort of academic backgrounds in space to join. What is your reaction to that?
That's not a discussion we're having inside the force, I can assure you.
Yeah.
That we are the envy of the world based on our enlisted corps. And the quality of people that are enlisting in the Space Force is off the charts. Average age 22. They come in with a mature understanding of, they have a lot of college in their background, well educated. The tasks that we're giving them to do, they are unbelievable. And the value that we get for our enlisted cadre would be hard to replicate in any other model. I'm so proud of what the enlisted corps does for the Space Force that I go, what problem are we trying to fix? They're amazing, and they're doing exactly what we ask them to do at a level that's mind-boggling sometimes. And so I just don't know what problem that fixes. If we just want to do things differently because we're space and we're going to do things differently, I always bristle at that. I like to fix problems where things are broken, not where things are working great, and I couldn't be more proud of what our enlisted force does.
And I'm sure you can't give us specifics, but you talked a little bit about before about commanders recognizing enemy space capabilities. Can you be I'll ask first, can you be any more specific in terms of what they see or what you see as the biggest threat in that domain?
The PRC has developed what we've kind of, tongue-in-cheek called a kill web. And it's nothing more than a series of hundreds of satellites that are a sensor network that provide real-time updates targeting quality information of our force. When you talk about having to move a force into the Western Pacific, for example, they will come into range and with very accurate targeting because of this kill web before they're in a position to do anything in terms of meeting military objectives. This is a huge problem. And Indo-Pacific is where we see this most acutely. Admiral Paparo recognizes this, and that's why we have to build our capabilities to try to disrupt that, so that when we're trying to achieve military objectives, our soldiers, sailors, and airmen are safe and not under this umbrella of a very accurate, very long-range set of weapons.
And looking sort of to the other adversary. There's been all sorts of news about Russia's army being degraded in Ukraine, losing lots of people. They do obviously, though, have a potent space force as well. Where do you see that threat sort of going in the next couple of years?
The PRC has demonstrated an accelerated ability to put capacity on orbit. That's what's most concerning to me in the Western Pacific. When you look at what the Russians are doing, I'll give you 3 examples that show great concern, I think. First, months before the invasion of Ukraine, they demonstrated a kinetic kill capability. An anti-satellite missile destroyed a satellite. This is 14 years after the PRC did the same thing. All the lessons of hazardous debris have been learned and talked about, and yet they still chose to destroy a satellite. You could argue that was for messaging purposes. A message received. This is a warfighting domain, and you intend to be aggressive and demonstrate that capability, so now we're going to think about how we would respond. Second, when that invasion occurred, it was a cyber attack against Viasat and the ground network. We have to remember that space capabilities can be negated using ground techniques, cyber techniques. So we have to defend our assets not just on orbit, but also in the networks as well. But we have to pay attention to that. And you see jamming efforts. You see a tremendous use of space capabilities on the modern battlefield. And then this idea of putting a nuclear weapon on orbit. The Russians are demonstrating reckless, aggressive behaviors with regards to how they intend to contest the space domain that will have far-reaching impacts beyond any localized military effect. This is of great concern, and we have to think about how we can be in a position of strength to maintain deterrence so that they don't take those actions.
I want to transition a little bit to sort of space policy writ broad across the administration. In the OMB budget for NASA, Artemis after a certain level is canceled, Gateway's canceled. We'll see what happens, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the sort of space industrial base for NASA impacts the Space Force, and whether those cancellations will impact you at all, if they happen.
Well, we share the domain with commercial, civil, and other national security partners, which means the industrial base supports all of those technologies. And so anytime a government customer reduces the demand signal to the same industrial base, I think there are consequences. We just have to take that into consideration, I think, and make sure that we don't, in an attempt to get too efficient or to reduce spending in one area, we actually jeopardize other areas because the industrial base contracts in a way that we can't control. So because we share the industrial base with NASA, I'm always interested in what their budget is. I'm always interested in what technologies they're pursuing. Try not to be redundant. If they're developing capabilities there that we can take advantage of, that's less R&D that I have to put in place. And so it's a very tight relationship in terms of how we interact with the industrial base.
And the White House is also bringing back the National Space Council, which in the first Trump administration was pretty key to standing up the Space Force. What sort of hopes do you have for your relationship with the council? How will that work? And perhaps the thing that comes to my mind is their role in coordinating Golden Dome might be pretty key.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything official yet, so you're the reporter here on this one. But what I will tell you is that anytime we elevate the national discussion on space, whether it's commercial, civil, or for national security purposes, I think that's a benefit. There is no question that space is a critical national interest. And I mean that from an economic standpoint, from a diplomatic standpoint, from information sharing, transparency, basic democratic values. Space is tremendously important. And I haven't even said national security, which is my business to make sure we use space effectively for that. So the value that space brings, it is a critical national interest. Any organization, mechanism, narrative that elevates that discussion to our most senior levels, whether it's Capitol Hill, whether it's in the executive branch, that's a powerful thing. And so I always support those kinds of efforts. We always have to keep the discussion in mind at the highest levels.
And on sort of the biggest national security space issue of the day is Golden Dome. What that will look like, how much it will cost. What is the next phase? What is the next target for you in terms of figuring out what that looks like?
We're still in the early planning of it, trying to think about it at the high level. It's a system of systems. It's not, you don't buy Golden Dome. You orchestrate a program that includes a lot of programs that you have to stitch together in very technical ways. And so it's a system of systems. Well, which systems are critical, which ones are which ones are affordable, which ones are practical in terms of the technology we can rapidly bring to bear. This is the analysis that's going on now at a high level. We'll put a basic plan together. We'll submit it to the Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense will take it to the White House, and we'll either be moving out or adjustments will be made, et cetera. So that's where we are, is in that basic planning to say, given the threat scenarios that we think you're trying to defend against, here are the systems that we think are appropriate. Here's the technology that's available, et cetera. Here's our plan and how we would proceed. And we're in that planning phase.
And agreed on the planning phase. There is that, I think it's almost $500 billion estimate from the Congressional Budget Office. Does that feel high to you, or does that feel like within the range of what might be spent given certain?
I'm 34 years in this business. I've never seen an early estimate that was too high. It's the nature of the business, I think, that we don't always understand the full level of complexity until you're actually in execution, doing the detailed planning. And so my gut tells me there's going to be some additional funding that's necessary. So yeah, there's always sticker shock, because space and these kinds of capabilities are exquisite. They are unique in the sense that there's not a lot of market that would drive the cost down. And so, yes, there is sticker shock, but it doesn't surprise me.
Well, I think we have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you so much for your time and insight. We hope everyone will join us soon. Come check out in the breakout session. I'll have a session with former NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. We'll be talking a little bit about the NASA budget stuff I brought up. Should be a very interesting conversation. It's for pro subscribers only, but if you'd like to come and you're not a pro subscriber, just find us in the break room and let us know. That about covers it. We'll have a brief video from our sponsors at RTX, and thank you all again.
Thank you.